and welcome to episode number 8 of the OBRY Hours. I'm your host, John McTemus. I'm doing this as a really quick follow-up to the last one, episode 7. Because the whole point of episode 7 was to talk a lot about origins. Everybody's origins. Because everybody had to come from somewhere. And when I say everybody, so let's just say people. And not just people, life forms. Or the organic world came from somewhere. And of course there's already a lot of argument about that. Really between the church and various factions, various other religions, and science, and mainstream science. And even within the sphere of science, so-called, there's disagreement, of course, on origins. I'll start by saying that it is the most unreasonable concept, idea, that the life that we can witness, study, understand, organic life in this world we live in, to study it, to observe it, to dissect it, to try to analyze it, and take it in, and comprehend it. And then to honestly think. Now, I'm not talking about the liars who are just deceiving. To honestly think that all of that came through some sort of intelligent development process that just happened because it just happened. I want to say that it's misguided, but it doesn't even seem misguided. I don't think anybody who really understands the organic world we live in could think that. So I think it's beyond misguided. I think it's absurd in the extreme. And what that leaves, if you reject this idea that there was a development from some random process that's just beyond the realm of sense. And they've made up all kinds of possibilities to try to cover for how absurd it is when you see something so intelligent and you see, the ecosystems, how they work so well together. The sky as a complex, precise timepiece. The way that all the parts work together, besides how magnificent the parts themselves are, down to the cellular level. To think that was produced by anything or anyone other than someone immensely wise and intelligent, beyond our grasp, to even grasp at the level of brilliance of the mind which made that. Chaos produces chaos. It does not produce order. But an orderly power and an orderly mind produces things that are orderly. They are not only beautiful and complex and sometimes terrible, depending on your perspective, but they're all orderly, everything being distinct. Plants don't tend to mix. This is not a natural thing. Every year, year after year, the flora and the fauna keep reproducing after its kind. We have everything in this organic world made and reproducing itself after its kind, just as it was designed to do in the first place. And that is good. Things functioning as they should is good. Everything reproducing as it was designed to do is good. And everything maintaining its genetic integrity is good. What is not good and what is in complete defiance of the one who created everything and sustains everything and commanded everything to reproduce as is natural, as it was created after its own kind, to mix those things is in utter defiance of the one who made and sustains everything. So, there's the question of people. It's hard to use terms like man, because we don't know, well, what is man? And the thing is, in the Bible, a lot of words have been imposed on the text. We have words for male gender in relation to specifically a certain kind or species, and female gender. Okay, those words aren't always applied across the board to male and female gender of beasts. These are things that we're going to get into, because a lot of language, again, a lot of language that today we are still operating within, and it is a tool to keep us confused and to keep us in a state of not knowing, first off, what is the order of everything created, and how is it that the creator of everything, Yahweh, designed everything to be and to function. Because to go against that is, I would say, is the height of rebellion and wickedness. If he's the one who designed and created everything, and he made it to function in a certain way, then to go against the way that he designed everything, and to go against the way everything was to function in a way that is damaging or confusing or that changes the character and nature of what he designed and literally brought into being, as described mainly in Genesis chapter 1. To go against that is the greatest folly. And it can't ever produce good results. It's wickedness. It's folly. If he's the one who made everything, then how should I say this? He determines what is good. So if he determines, as he does in Genesis 1, every time he creates, because we'll see a pattern in Genesis 1 of conception. He conceives that this should be, and then he makes it. There are different words being used, different verbs and different concepts being used in Genesis 1, and there's different ones in Genesis 2. And then Genesis 3, is more bleed over. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about, it does apply to the rising, I don't know if I want to say popularity, but maybe the rising popularity of identity as far as who are the Israelites, because who they are is radically important to our day and age, to the overall plans of Yahweh, to what Yeshua Jesus did, who it applies to, and what is supposed to be the end results. We have to know these things. And of course, with what's being done in the nations, socially, racially, the way that the Jews who control the media and the papers, the financial institutions, trade, merchandise, are pushing what we sense. If we don't know, if we don't even have a source necessarily, we can sense that these things are not right and natural. And I could give you examples. And I'm sure enough of you who have lived and experienced enough understand those things. Let's say this. All right. For instance, I was not raised in a house that was in any way overtly racist. Now, I was raised in a small town, and it was all white. And that term is it's kind of a funny term. Again, it's one of those terms: white, black, brown, yellow, red, man. They're terms that we won't necessarily find in the Bible in the way we think of them, okay? But I'll just use the terms that we're familiar with. It was a small town. It was a mostly white town. And, my parents were the products of a hell of a lot of post-World War II indoctrination, because, of course, the wrong people won that war. And it caused a wave of lies the world over to begin snowballing from that time. And my parents were indoctrinated, and they did not say, in our home, there really wasn't talk of race, and they tried to practice this idea that everybody was the same. Whether they believed it or not, whether they understood it by experience or not, was another thing. They were indoctrinated, and rightly, understandably so, let's say that, because they were from that generation where the indoctrination was, came out full force after World War II. But, even growing up in a house where there was no overt talk of race or differences, and what is good and natural, what is not, mixing or not mixing. Even as a small child, if I saw two people of different races together, something registered to me as not normal. And as a child, now I had at least one friend from the time I was very young who wasn't purely white, and I didn't think a thing of that. It wasn't that sort of thing to where I thought that being friends with, being kind to somebody who wasn't the same as you, or who looked the same as you, or anything, that there was anything strange or unnatural about that whatsoever. It was the idea of two people of different races being together in the sense of copulation, cohabitation, romantically, from the time I was little. It was, to me, not normal. And of course, over the course of my life, I got indoctrinated, and I ended up as a young adult as a race mixer for a really long time. I had a very long-term relationship with somebody who was not of my race. And so spending a lot of time around people not of my race, first off, I know that a lot of the I'm going to have to just call them assumptions or claims, or maybe even sometimes tropes of Christian identity are just not correct. And we're going to have to talk about those. But what we're going to have to do is look at what the Bible says about the creation, and if we can determine where people come from and where what we call races come from. Because I think that the rise in popularity of identity and Christian identity, and I know I repeat this a lot, but it bears repeating for anybody who's not familiar. Christian identity, what's called CI, Christian identity, is not particularly the same thing as identity or Israelite identity. Okay, Israelite identity really just covers those people who understand that the Israelites, as far as not only the 10 tribes, but also, a great deal of Judah, including Benjamin, Levi, were taken away from the land that was given to our fathers quite early by Ashur, Assyria, and more than, of course, Judah specifically. So Judah, Benjamin, Levi were deported at the time of Babel, centuries later. So the vast majority of Israel, and we're talking about 12 tribes, 13 if you count the fact that Joseph had a double portion. So his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, both of them pretty much counted as a tribe. Okay, so we're sort of looking at 13 because Joseph gets a double portion. Joseph counts as 2. So, 12 tribes is in 12 sons of Jacob, but 13 in actuality. Because Jacob did adopt the 2 sons of Joseph in his stead, so that does make 13. So the vast majority of all of these people, and remember, these people, these tribes, did become distinct from one another over a long period of time. They were in the land. Even the house of Israel, which represents kind of 10 tribes there, and we do get a lot of that muddled. I want to make that very clear because of, for instance, where Simeon lived, prophecies about Simeon and Levi being absorbed and things like that. So let's just say the house of Israel represents the greater amount of the tribes. The house of Judah mostly represents Judah. Now Benjamin was nearby, so Benjamin kind of stayed there mostly around Judah, though they were on the border with the house of Israel and Ephraim. So they kind of went both ways in a sense. And most of those of Levi, which is actually Louis, they came into Judah after the split because the king, Jeroboam, who was not of the line of David. None of the kings of the house of Israel were of the line of David. Okay. And it didn't stay consistent. There were kings from different tribes and different bloodlines, all Israelite, that took power at various times in the kingdom of the house of Israel. Okay. So Jeroboam didn't want all of the people to go to Jerusalem and worship, so he set up a very idolatrous system, a system that did not worship in the way that Yahweh had given to our fathers before they came into Canaan. So anyways, that's kind of how everything ended up sort of getting separated out. But yeah, the vast majority had been taken out of the land quite a very long time, even before the time of Ezra and Nehemiah coming back to the land to rebuild. And that was only a very small remnant. It was tens of thousands of men that came back to do that. When we're talking about just men that were of fighting age from about 20 to probably about 50 or 60. You would consider that 40-year gap as a pretty good gauge of grown men who could fight and work in government and all that stuff, probably before retirement age. You figure there were over 600,000 of them, not including the Luim or Levites when they came into Canaan. So by extrapolation, that means a good few million, 3 to 4 million, just Israelites. That is the physical genetic seed of Jacob. And that was many centuries before this. So the population was quite large. They were deported. They were planted in a certain region of Asher, but did they stay there? The evidence says they did not stay there, and Asher themselves went through a lot of upheaval too. So the idea that they would have stayed there and faded out is, it's certainly not following the biblical narrative. And right before they were really defeated by Asher and heavily deported, that's the house of Israel, Yahweh sent the prophet Hosea, which has almost the same name as Yeshua, Jesus. And in Hosea 1, what he promises Israel is that it's their kingdom and their time in the land is over, and that they were going to be cast out and sent into the wilderness, and they were going to be living terribly difficult lives, but that they were going to be multiplied, greatly multiplied. So an idea that somehow the house of Israel faded into obscurity is just simply not biblical. It's not following the narrative. And then, of course, when we see this, the passage from Jeremiah that I brought up yesterday, Jeremiah 31 through 34, of course they weren't amalgamated or forgotten. Part of the whole point of preserving a people is preserving a people as far as their seed. That is important. Now, I don't agree with some people in identity or Christian identity who say that the Bible is entirely about race, but there is a huge racial component there because, again, we have to go back to kinds. If we're talking about kinds and the importance of kinds, like with like, and reproducing after our kind, then that component is important. But if we pay close attention, we'll find out that there are also a lot of misconceptions that folks in identity or Christian identity believe or teach. And again, I'm not attacking them, because I went over who I am and where I come from in the last episode. So, we're talking about I hope, and we're talking about the sincere people in identity, my kinsmen. Now, the agents and assets of the enemy are not, and they are purposely pushing lies and errors. And believe me, identity and Christian identity is absolutely chock full of those people. And I would suggest that anybody out there scrutinize everyone under a very close and accurate microscope. Those people who come out claiming to be identity and Christian identity and start teaching things that they can't prove, and things that are straw men, things that are very easy for our enemies to swoop in and make the idea of who Israel is look silly. That's the whole point of planting agents out there to spread disinformation, to make up dogmas that they can't prove. It's so that they build a straw man that the enemy can make look terrible and ridiculous, make it look ugly. There's plenty of them out there that make the idea of who Israel is and what is their role and purpose in this creation and in time. They make that very biblical idea and the search for what is the truth in this, in all that, they make it look vulgar and ugly and ridiculous and silly and stupid, and they do it on purpose. And this is what the enemy does. They control the opposition, and what they do is they build a straw man out of the opposition so that it doesn't look attractive from the outside, and if it should look attractive, it's very easy for their opposition agents to just make it look like what it is, because these people are making it look repulsive. So, straight to the Bible. We're going to have to start at the beginning. We're going to have to start at Genesis 1. And we're going to need to look at the creation and what was created and the reason for it. And we're going to have to take a look kind of closely at some of these words to see if we've really understood what's going on here in Genesis 1. Because getting at least the first few chapters of Genesis right, and I would say you really need to get everything in Genesis right all the way up to Abraham, and then you really need to get everything right from Abraham after. We got to get everything right, or we're going to get everything wrong to one degree or another. So we're not going to start, though, at Genesis 1:1. As important as everything is from day 1 through 5, and it is important, but that's a topic for another time. We're going to look at concepts, and mostly the concepts that are taught by a lot of people in identity. They're definitely concepts that were championed by Dominic McCausland in Adam and the Adamites. And what we want to do is we want to see if those are true. We do want to see if they make sense or not, because it's really terrible to try to read and understand and think about the Bible and comprehend it if the concepts don't make sense. We want them to make sense. But we don't want to take something that's not scriptural, we can't prove biblically, and make that into some sort of doctrine that makes sense to us, because there are some doctrines that would appear to make sense, but they are not biblical. So all I want to do is go with what the Bible says and what can be proven from the Bible, and if it can be proven from the Bible and it doesn't make sense, then we're going to have to think about that too. The first thing is, McCausland uses this, and so does a lot of other people, is this idea of days as either a 24-hour period or days as ages. Almost across the board, whether you're just talking about, let me do the distinction, okay? So that the two sort of main factions in Israelite identity is sort of comes down to dual seed line, non-dual seed line. And I'll leave it up to you guys to look into that if you don't know what the whole dual seed line concept is. There are other factions out there that believe in dual seed lines too, but they apply it to other things, angels. They get very sci-fi with it, but that's kind of the difference between, identitarians. You have non-dual seed line and dual seed line. But both of them seem to agree on this idea of days as ages, and they seem to believe that to make sense of everything in our world, to make sense of everything that they discover in the Bible, other things they discover in the Bible, to make sense of the races, the distinctions between races, the distinctions between people, to make sense of a whole lot of things. One of the things that they do is they affirm an idea that when you see the word yom, and that's going to be Strong's H3117 as a reference. I'll give you the Strong's numbers just as a reference, okay? Y-U-M, yum. And what they believe is that yom can either be a 24-hour period, or it can be a very long, vast period of time, undefined, vast, long period of time. And that's one way they sort of deal with it. There's problems with that, though. There are distinct problems with that. The one problem, and I'll tell you how they do this, how they get to that conclusion, is they will take, let's say, they might take passages such as Genesis 2. And a lot of times they're going to read it in English, but we could read it in OBRY too and consider what's being said. So, like Genesis 2:4, in English, it says, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens." And the reasoning there would be that, well, he made them over these 6 days, 7 if you count the Sabbath. So it can't be talking about literal 24-hour days because, look, it just used that word day to describe a long period of time. Now, there's going to be other passages that do something similar to that. So now some people that believe that Genesis 2 is just an expansion of day 6 of creation. It's just kind of focusing in on Adam himself. Okay, so the people who believe that, this would be more like the Hugh Ross kind of camp. That they'll make a case for day age, day can be age, day age theory out of saying things like, well, there just was no way that all of that was actually done in one day. That's just crazy. And they've got a good case for that. Like all of that being done in one day, that's a stretch. That is an immense stretch to think that that could all happen in one day. I agree. But Genesis 2 is not a repeat of Genesis 1, that creation of Adam. We're going to see that. It's actually quite different. And it's not quite different maybe in the way that some of you have heard it as different. It's even different than that. So the people like Hugh Ross that would argue, we're going to see that they don't have a foundation for that. Now, some others would say things like, for instance, early in Genesis 1, like Genesis 1, 11, and 12. In Genesis 11, we're going to see this pattern. First, in Genesis 1:11, Yahweh, and he's not called Yahweh in Genesis 1:1. He's just called Elohim. And then in Genesis 1:2, we see him as Yahweh Elohim. And then a few chapters after that, we see him more commonly just referred to as Yahweh, okay? So anyways, we'll just say Elohim, okay? Genesis 1:11. First, he pronounces that something should be, that something is going to be, okay? And then it happens, or he literally brings it into being. These things occur, the creation of everything in our organic world, they occur in various processes. But virtually every time he's going to deem it to be so, and then it's going to happen, or he's going to, there's different ways that sometimes it would seem more of a physical, visceral thing, and sometimes it would be if he commands something to happen, then it happens. So in Genesis 1, 11, and 12, he starts by saying, it's Uyemer Aliyim Tedesha Eretz Desha Osheb Mazerio Zero Otz Peri Osha Peri Laminu Asher Zerou Bu Ol Eretz Uye Kan. So what he's saying there is, let the land sprout forth all of this vegetation, and let it bring forth these trees, bearing their fruit and their seed in themselves. So, they don't have to be mated male and female. They're bearing their seeds in themselves, okay? And then they're just reproducing with the seed that's in themselves. So not everything does that. Some things have male and female. Some things produce their seed within themselves. He's just distinguishing these things. And the next verse we see is it says, U tutsa eretz desha osheb. So what happens is when he commands this to happen, it happens. Now, some people who believe in day age will tell you that that it would have taken time for, say, all of the flora to have sprouted from seed in the ground, for trees, and we know trees take a long time to grow, for trees to grow and so on and so forth, so that's pretty good evidence for day age. However, it's kind of making a lot of assumptions. It's making assumptions that he wanted to create them from seed to adult. There's no evidence that he made anything else from seed to adult. He couldn't have really made all of the organic, the animals and fish and birds from seed to adult, unless he was growing them all in an artificial womb and then introducing them into the environment. And then you get all sci-fi at that point and start coming up with all kinds of vain imaginings. When it's just as simple to look right at it and realize that he commanded this to happen, and the earth, the land, the Eretz, which is a little more properly just to call Eretz the land, it produced it. It produced it. And it can produce those things very quickly and full grown and even appearing to be quite old. And that's the other thing. So they'll argue for mainstream science and the way that mainstream science uses types of dating mechanisms, whether it be like a carbon dating or like helium escape dating, all of those methods, to show that rocks, organic life are these great old ages, not thinking for a second that he made everything else when he starts making all of these creatures and organic life forms. He's making them mature. So you're telling me that he wouldn't make the rocks mature? Are you telling me that he wouldn't make the moon to look then just as it does now? Why wouldn't he? So there's assumptions there. There's assumptions that mixes a lot of establishment, so-called science, a lot of establishment so-called history, and a lot of them will appeal to like Chinese history. They'll say, well, Chinese history goes back over 10,000 years. Well, gosh, guys, who has been in control of China for probably as long as we are aware? Who has been in control of the records and the information for as long as we even know of? And they have very inorganically made China and the Orient look like something that they are not. As early as a century ago, the Orient, let's say more specifically China, the mainland Orient, was third world. And it was very inorganically grown up to look very much like the West, to look like America and Europe, as though it were as advanced, as though it were full of people who were virtually the same but just looked a little different. They have been controlling the perceptions of people for a very long time, but you're going to believe that these records are authentic and organic. You're going to believe that the Egyptian records that they claim are authentic are indeed authentic. Look at who's controlling the information. And look at how they're trying to control it, what they're trying to convince us of. I would not trust anything that comes from their sources, and most of that comes from their sources. As far back as the inception of organizations such as the Royal Society, we have groups that are actively engaging in deceit and espionage against what appear to us to be their own people, but they're not their own people. And that's something that we have to learn also. Just because they're white, just because the people who put together the Royal Society and supposedly discovered all of this information and artifacts over in the Middle East, just because they're white does not make them the same people as the Israelites. It does not make them the same people as the common people of the land. And that's another mistake that we tend to make, thinking that the landlords, the so-called nobility of Europe, were of the same genetic stock as the common people that they ruled over, oppressed, killed, and used in any way they wanted to, sold into slavery, and so on and so forth, forced into wars, oftentimes forced into wars one against another, brother against brother, that these people were somehow of the same genetic stock as the people that they were ruling over? No, we're going to find that that's not the case. Maybe not in this show, but we will see that. And we ought to see that. It's very clear just in their actions and who they are. But it's also in prophecy. We can see that in prophecy too. Most specifically in Daniel. But anyways, back to days. So besides some of these arguments that appeal to mainstream sources, mainstream science, mainstream history, mainstream disciplines, which are for the most part born out of Hermeticism, which is occultism. It is not science. It is a religion. And the sources of which are people who are not our friends. These are not sources I would appeal to. Besides for that, what we have is the Bible, and that is only what we should be appealing to. The vast majority of all of the occurrences of the word yum, and I can just tell you that based on the Blue Letter Bible, eSword, the eSword says there's about 2,239 occurrences of the word yum. Out of those, the vast overwhelming majority of those occurrences, almost 2,000 of the 2,239 occurrences, are specifically in a context of a 24-hour period. Sunrises, sunsets, repeat. Sunrise, sunset, repeat. I should put night in there. So yum, lila, repeat. Yum, lila, repeat. That is the vast majority. In context, when you can see things like morning, evening, you can see things like it is the day and here's the night. That is the overwhelming majority of occurrences. And then you have the fact that after each one of these days, we specifically see that terms like evening, morning are used at the end of that, thus signifying an actual 24-hour period, a day, not an age. Okay, if it's an age, then you got to start thinking out, well, what does this idea of the evening and morning mean? Was it a great big long age? And then at a point, it started out like we can maybe look at an age and think of the start of the age as sort of the dawn. We'll say the dawn of the age. And we'll look at Genesis 1:11 and 1:12, and I guess 1:13 too, since that signifies it as the third day. So at the start of that, Elohim, God, he commanded that all of this flora, and including the trees, so, all of the plant life, spring forth. And that was the dawn of the age, and from seed it all sprung forth, and he let all of it grow for a very long time, and then what? Because then you have to deal with what? In the evening and the morning, so now we've got to deal with the night part of that age. If we have the dawn and day part, the glory of that age, then we have the night part of that age. Did the age then have to wind down? If we're looking at it as night euphemistically, was there a dark time in this third age of creation where a lot of the plant life that he created saw some very hard times for quite a long time until day 4 when he created the sun, the moon, and stars. It just doesn't really follow. And not logically, it does not follow. As well as, something I mentioned earlier is this symbiosis. There is a symbiosis of all of the life that exists in this organic world that we live in. So, the vegetation, the fruit-bearing trees, the grasses, and, all the grasses we have out there, including what we call weeds, they're all good. They all serve a purpose. Even the ones that seem more dangerous on the surface have good purposes, good uses. Many of them need to be pollinated. Now, a lot of them can get pollinated simply by the wind. However, that's not as efficient as, for instance, if you have bees and hummingbirds. Anybody who is in agriculture will tell you that, yeah, if we left it all just up to the wind, we may have some real problems with the transference of the pollens from male to female. Pollination is a big deal, and it can happen in places and some plants just with the wind, but it relies far more on the organic life, the animal and insect life, which, according to Genesis, hasn't been created yet. So this is going to be this huge age with no insects and birds and other animals that carry pollen on their bodies and take it from the male pollinator to the female. That's just not there. It doesn't exist. For ages, we just have this flora. And the other thing is, this, like I said, the sun, the moon, stars, they're not created until day 4. So plants really need sunlight. So it's photosynthesis. Now, light is created in day 1. That's true. But the thing is, there's 2 kinds of light. You can see this in the morning if you pay attention as the sun is coming up. Get yourself something that you're watching, that you're paying attention to, just as the sun is coming up, that will cast a shadow below it. Like your car. If you got your car in the driveway, you can sit inside your house and you can watch it. As the sun comes up, you will see there are 2 shadows. There is a long shadow that is going to be cast as the sun comes up. There is a milder shadow that is going to come from the light. The light was created first in day 1. And then Elohim, God, Yahweh, he separated the light from the darkness. The sun rules over the light. He called the light day. The sun rules in the day. The other light, the moon, rules in the night. And sometimes it makes its appearances during the day. You have these heavenly bodies, specifically the sun, that have so much to do with the processes of plants. Organic life is very dependent on the sun. It can go a day if he creates it on day 3 without the sun. It can have just the light. You can grow things with artificial light, but the sun is massively important for growth. You talk to people who live in areas where they don't get a lot of sun in the year, and it can be devastating. The lack of vitamin D that is produced by organic life because of the sun, and the lack thereof is very, very difficult on all flora and fauna, including people. So that idea is just not tenable. And one of the things that McCausland and a lot of other people do is they want to turn days into ages, and they don't really have much biblical evidence to speak of in trying to do that. And when they get to passages that would make it seem that way, such as that I just mentioned in Genesis 2, they really have to stretch it. Now, I'll tell you this before I actually address Genesis 2 and 4. There aren't an overwhelming amount of key verses, by the way, in the Bible in support of day age. And I've gone looking for them pretty hard, and I spent a considerable amount of time looking through all of the verses that have yom, whether it's just the simple yom, day, whether it's yamam, whether it's yamim. And as I said, the overwhelming amount absolutely confirms a 24-hour period. Sun up, sundown, night, repeat. There literally is only a couple little passages that are used to try to prove this. And then, as I said, all kinds of establishment material, which I have no idea why a lot of the people who should know better than to trust the establishment materials are using them to prove this. However, here's a big one. This is one of the big ones. Is Genesis 2:4, okay? And what we've got to understand is a couple of really, really key things about this, okay? Because let's do this. In English, and this is just the KJV English, but this is how most of them read, all right? Most of our English versions are really just repeats of King James, but Genesis 2:4, these, in King James English, these are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. And there's their anchor. Their anchor is that it says, in the day. It says, Yom. And they'll say, but obviously it wasn't a day. Obviously it was 7 days. So obviously this word Yom has to mean, that it could be this really long period of time. And I'll give you one other verse they use to really back that up, and it's just weak. But you look at Genesis 2:4 in OBRY, it says, Ale tu'uladut eshamaim u'aretz be'baram be'yom oshut Yahweh alayim aretz u'shamim. What it's saying is, now, important word, the second word there, tuladut. Tuladut. Okay, it comes from the root lad. Okay, and it's actually where we get the English lad. Okay, and it means produce of children. When a woman conceives and gives birth, that root is used in various different ways. Yalad, okay? Tuladut. When that word, ulad, is used, it is not referring back. It is referring forward. And we see it again in Genesis 5 because it's saying these are the yalad of Adam. And it goes forward, the generations. It's never referring back. It's always starting there, going forward. What it's saying is, these are the things and events that were birthed or produced forward from those 7 days of creation. Ale tuladut ashemaim u'aretz be'baram. Okay, these are the things that were produced or happened from the days, the 7 days of creation, forward of the heavens and the earth. Now, it goes on to say, after the ep8, so ep8 means all those things that were conceived and created. Be-yum oshut Yahweh alayim aretz ushamayim. This is important because what it should be saying is, in the day that completed Yahweh alayim aretz ushamayim. So what that should really be reading, and remember, these verse stops are a product of the Masoretic manuscripts. Okay? So we don't always want to necessarily trust verse stops as far as thoughts go. And thoughts can stop, and a new thought can start in the middle of a verse, because verses are Masoretic creations. Whenever anybody in Scripture quotes from another Scripture, they do not quote book, chapter, verse. They will quote a book. They will quote something from a book. The verses are a Masoretic contrivance. They're not there to necessarily help us. They make things easy. If we have to refer to something, then somebody can go find it really fast, okay? That's fine. But the problem is, even though they can be helpful, oftentimes they're not helpful because they can break up thoughts that are supposed to be continued in an even flow from one verse to the other. They break that thought up. This happens. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll put multiple thoughts in a single verse. What we have is, in Genesis 2:4, after the be-e-baram, then we start with be-yom, in the day, oshut, completed, Yahweh alayim. Now, in OBRY, oftentimes the verb comes before the subject, and then you'll see the object. Be-yom oshut Yahweh alayim aretz ushamayim. What that's saying is, these are the things that happened. These are the products of, these are the things that were given birth to in the day when Yahweh alayim had completed the heaven and the earth. And then we're going to start reading in Genesis 2:5 forward the things that immediately took place after those 7 days were completed. So this whole idea and the fact that they would point to something like Genesis 2:4 is them reading it wrong. And part of the reason it's being read wrong is because it's being read in, for one thing, the context of verse breaks, which are just a product of Masoretic manuscripts. Now, they didn't necessarily put in verse numbers in their manuscripts. What they put in was types of breaks. You can see them in the columns of all the manuscripts. Now, I have about 30-something manuscripts that I have put up at archive.org. You should be able to find them if you just do a search on OBRY project, and it's going to be like 30-something files. And I don't have it in front of me. But it's the only archive page I've put up so far at archive.org. And it's all of these manuscripts that I've collected. And what I've done is I've indexed them at the front so that you can easily reference every book that's in that manuscript, okay? But you will find that there's no verses. You have to look for breaks. And they put different breaks in depending on subject. They would put small verse breaks in if they thought those breaks needed to be there because the subject changed just a little bit. They would put larger breaks in there if the subject changed quite a bit. And you will see this in some of the older digitized manuscripts because they'll mark them. Okay, they'll either mark them with what they call the peh, or they will mark them with what they call the samek, and they're just two different kinds of breaks. One's a small break in subject matter, and one is a larger break in subject matter. And again, you have to understand what they're doing there is they are influencing the text. That does not mean that that was the intent of the author who originally wrote the text. We have no way of knowing how exactly they were breaking that up other than to pay attention to the context of it. If we pay attention to the context of it and the way the language moves, and if a thought is being complete, and if the next thought is being directly connected or referring to the next thought, or the thought before to the one after, then we know. And in this case, and in this context, we know that first off, it starts with the thought that these are the things that were produced. They were produced from the heaven and the earth in the creation, in the day that Yahweh Elohim completed the heaven and the earth. We're starting at Genesis 2:4. The heavens and the earth have been completed in 7 literal 24-hour days. And then from Genesis 2:4, we have the product of all of these things being created and putting in motion, and the fact that that God commanded all of the life that He created to reproduce themselves, to fill the earth, to do certain things. And then from that point, when He created everything in those 7 days, these are the things that happened or were produced, or that the creation itself gave birth to from the time it was complete forward. That's one of the reasons that we know that Genesis 2:4 onward are not a repeat of Genesis 24 through 26, I think, or 1:22 through 20. I'm going to have to go back to it real quick. Genesis 1:24. We'll just say Genesis 1:24 out to the rest of the chapter, 1:31. It's not a repeat. And we know that it's not a repeat because, for one thing, we have this word, ta'uladut, comes from the root lad. And when it's used, it is always going to be referring to things or people produced from a person or a point forward. Always. It is never used as referring to something that happened. It's always referring to something that is happening or will happen from this point forward. It even has that D in there, which tends to point forward. It's not pointing back. So that verse being used as some kind of a key verse to argue for day age is just wrong. Now the second one that they're wanting to use quite often, and I have to sigh, is 2 Peter. It's 2 Peter 3:16. Now the first thing is, anybody who, let's just say anybody who is kind of questioning the authenticity and the authority of this character called Paul will know that there's question. There are serious, valid inquiries into the authenticity of 2 Peter also. A very informative site to go to get a lot of argument concerning Paul. The real issues that exist. whether you want to stick with Paul or not, and I haven't made a final decision, whether you want to stick with him or not, or whether you're questioning him, which I think you should be. You should question everything. You should examine everything, because if you don't, and if people out there tell you it's off the table, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's Paul. I don't care if it's flat earth. I don't care if it's atomic theory. I don't care if it's races, the question of races, salvation, the question of salvation. I don't care. If they tell you it's off the table, if they tell you it's not important, they are being dogmatic, and what are they trying to hide? Nothing's off the table. No one is above reproach. Do you know that's the kind of idea and attitude that the Jews use to try to keep their position set and solid so that they can keep getting support from duped Christians in the churches believing that they're Israel when they don't have any proof or any fruits? So I think it's insane that the same people who understand that that's the way that it works when it comes to the Jews, all of a sudden they don't even want you to start talking about Paul. They don't want you to examine him. Let's examine him. Let's find out if he's on the same page as Scripture. Let's see if he's on the same page as you show, Jesus. So anyways, 2 Peter 3:16, okay? And this is the way it goes. So if it's authentic, let's say Peter wrote this, or let's say he dictated it, which I think Peter, the historic Peter as we see him in the Gospels, I think he was literate. I think he was a very smart guy. I don't think he was some kind of illiterate dope who couldn't write and had to have somebody else write it, whether he dictated it or not. Maybe if he dictated a letter or two, maybe he did that simply because a lot of people who were more thinkers and doers had people that they would dictate things to. I mean, as a matter of fact, if I wasn't made so poor by this Jewish banking system that we have, I might have somebody that I dictate to. That's not weird. That doesn't mean you're illiterate. But anyways, yeah, I apologize. It's 2 Peter 3:8, not 3:16. So I'm going to go to that right now. 2 Peter 3:8, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. And then in context, he goes on, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, of some men count slackness, because this is supposed to be in the context of eschatological things, things that have to take place over a long period of time, or waiting a long period of time for things to take place. So I guess what we'd have to do from this very, very tiny minority verse is we would have to then conclude that even though in the vast bulk majority of the scriptures, i.e. the law and the prophets and wisdom writings, that it was not revealed to us that Yahweh himself counts one of his days, like we would one of ours, as 1,000 of our years. We actually have no verses whatsoever that is alluding to that. We have to wait for Peter after at least 1,500 years of Yahweh interacting with the people that he made into Israel, not letting us know that all the way up until 2 Peter 3:8. And I guess that really pinches you into not day age, but literally day equals 1,000 years. And you know something? Ages are really funny because ages are oftentimes defined by things happening within it. So, you can refer to the Ice Age. You can refer to the Middle Age as. They're not defined as 1,000 years. They're just a period of time that, people call an age. Or we could look at it in the most sensible interpretation possible, where he is using hyperbole to say that time doesn't mean anything to him in context with his plans. He does things over very, very long periods of time. He accomplishes his will. And to us, given our short little brief lives, it seems so utterly massive. But since he's not even in time, because he tells the end from the beginning. So he's not even in time. He created and conducts time, and he's not in it. And he sees and knows everything that's already happened. So 1,000 years really can't be as a day to him, since that would make him in time. He's not in time. So again, that's just another very minority verse that the day-agers use to prove their theory. And of course, it just doesn't follow. The other thing is this. Now, guys like McCausland and people in identity, if they're going to claim that, for one thing, all of the other races existed and were around long before the Adamic race, and they're going to basically count white people as the Adamic race, and all of the others, they use all kinds of different terms for the other races. And again, the Bible doesn't have any word that's per se translated as race, because our perception is just not quite right when we use words like races. We will see that. But they have this idea that, and McCausland argued for this quite extensively, that all of these other races were created long before Adam. Okay, so just to put it into modern simple terms, that all of the non-white races were created far before the white race. Now, they do understand that as far as the creation goes, all of the life that exists on land was created on the same day. It was created on the same day. That's one of the reasons if they want to have that theory, they have to have day age. They just have to. Now, they can't have it in context with 2 Peter 3:8, because if you're going to take that literally, 1,000 years is as a day to him. So you got 1,000 years to work in, right? And if you cram the other races that are non-white all the way at the beginning of your day age, you don't have 3,000 or 4,000 years more of Chinese or Egyptian or any other records. At best, stretching it, you'd have 1,000 years. Not quite 1,000 years. This is why they need it. Now, if we read just the text of Genesis, it doesn't read like that whatsoever. It reads that he made all of these other various things, and then he made man. All in the same day. He made all of the life on the land, and then I will give you this. He does distinguish Adam after he makes all of these other life forms. He does make Adam, but it's all in the same day. You can't have thousands of years more. And as I just explained, and took a very long time, there is this symbiotic relationship. And we're going to see as we start just looking at the wording of the verses in Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 24, that it doesn't really follow that other races would be created thousands of years beforehand and then be developing, and then Adam is created. And we clearly have Adam being created in Genesis chapter 1 on the same day, day 6, as all of this other life that was created to occupy the land. Whether you want to call it mammalia, and so on and so forth, marsupilami, etc. Or what? So we do have to look just at the text, and we have to see just what the text says, because I guarantee you, we are looking at a 7 literal actual day, 7-day creation. And then we're looking at things happening beyond that. And I don't even, do I even have to bring up Exodus 20? In verse 11, why we even keep the Sabbath, why that's part of the 10 Commandments. For 6 days, in 6 days, Yahweh created the heavens, the earth, and everything that's in them, and he rested on the 7th. He said 6 days. Now, where does day get its name? It gets its name from, I want to quote this right, so I'm going back to from 2 Peter to Genesis 1. So he creates light on the first day, and in Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, it says that Elohim Kara, he determined, he deemed, he called light, as in our light. What did he call it? Day. He called light day. And darkness he called night. That's where the word comes from. He called the light that he separated from the darkness Yom, day. He called the light day. And that's why if you want to support the day-age theory, you've got to get into all kinds of imaginings about how these vast ages would have worked, other than looking at all of the creation and the way that everything would have been created in its maturity, ready to go in 7 days, and then it functioning together as it was created in that 6 days of time. And then starting in Genesis 2:4, we have what happened, or what that creation produced, because it was like a giant machine with thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of parts now working organically together to produce things. And they were all created in 6 literal days. But let's just start at Genesis 1:24, which is the account of day number 6, and actually look at the language and actually see what the language is actually telling us. So in Genesis 1:24 through 31, what you're going to find is that there's no version out there. There's no major manuscript or collated manuscript out there that really deviates much from the narrative, from the popular narrative. Okay, so if I read to you right now Genesis 1:24 through 26 from the King James Version, it only varies slightly. If I should read it from Brenton, which is an English translation from the Septuagint, and know this, that even the Septuagint it doesn't stay consistent in the terminology used. In fact, the Septuagint varies quite a lot in its terminology. The language used, Koine Greek, is not consistent. It is not a language used, at least in the context of the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. It's not a language that stays consistent in its root forms of its words. It does change and it does vary. The Septuagint does not in any way bear any resemblance to a linguistic work that looks like, let's just say, something original or something pure. It just looks like a translation. That's all it looks like. Whereas the OBRY, or the, let's just say, since the manuscripts we all have, for the most part, they're just all written in blockface Assyrian with all of the Masoretic trappings. So whether you want to say Hebrew or OBRY, which OBRY is just taking that block Syrian written oriented from right to left with all of the demands of the Masoretes, which is look of the character or glyph, pronunciation of the all of the letters, the vowel points, the denial that OBRY has the same 5 basic vowels that we have to this day in Western European languages. In a lot of languages, I mean, it's extremely ubiquitous. Those 5 vowel tones with slight variation, and then of course them applying different nickudot dots and dashes to the very same word at different times in order to classify those same concepts as different concepts. And of course it doesn't follow. If we were to look at any manuscript, any work, maybe of a language that we did not know, and we were just to think of, well, how would language logically work? We would always be looking for things that looked the same to mean the same thing. If we look at it just in like pictographs, which we should. If we looked at the pictograph of a man, and you know what that looks like if you've used a public restroom. If we see that pictograph of a man, and then we see it in another place, we're going to associate that same picture as meaning the same thing. We wouldn't associate it as a cow. That's exactly the same way that we need to look at these words. And the reason that you can know that OBRY is original, or Hebrew is the original language, is because there is a consistency of the word forms and of roots and the way that they are used across the whole face of the scriptures. And I am talking about Genesis to Malachi, because when we get into the New Testament, we are actually dealing with a translation of a translation. And that's a different animal, which I covered a little bit in the last one, just pointing out the inconsistencies in the way that they translate the name of the Messiah, and the way that, for instance, the different kinds of phonetic decisions concerning the lettering, the so-called Greek lettering that they insert there, which doesn't follow consistent patterns. OBRY and even Masoretic Hebrew, it at least follows those consistent patterns. It is a language that has a form, a consistent form that it keeps. Okay? So, anyways, all of the major translations that any of our English translations that we have that have come from, they're all going to say basically the same thing. Now, they're going to mix it up a little bit, of course. But let's just say Genesis 1:24 through 1:26 in KJV. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle, and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good." Well, actually, we'll stop at 25. We won't go to 26. We'll save that for a few minutes here. Okay, so it really doesn't matter if you look in Brenton's, Bishop's, Douay-Rheims, Geneva, World English Bible. They're all going to say basically about the same thing. What we want to look at is we want to see what does the language actually say. And I will warn you that there are going to be times that if you look at the actual wording of Hebrew, there are going to be times when, as you get to know this language, that things don't seem like they add up. Part of that is the changing of grammars and syntax by the Masoretes. Part of it's going to be a device that they used called Kir and Katib, in which they changed manuscripts. And those men who collated the main manuscripts that all of the Bibles that we have today come from, made decisions about what they wanted to keep and what they did not. So you know, when you get to a passage with wording that doesn't seem like it makes sense or fit, you really have to compare that across the whole of the Old Testament. So Genesis to Malachi. So anyways, let's do this. In OBRY, what we see is Uyamer aliyim Teutza e'aretz nepash hiya lamine be'eme uramash hitu aretz lamine iyei kan. So what he's saying is, remember about the grasses, the flora, and how he started by saying, he first starts with a statement, and then things are made. He either makes them or they happen. So he begins with this statement, and what he's doing is he's giving classifications. They are quite broad classifications, but we want to remember them because we want to try to compare them in a consistent way over the whole of Scripture. And when I say a consistent way, I do not mean as the way that Strong's classifies them, because Strong's is, for the most part, following Masoretic dictates, okay? So one of the best examples is found in this very verse. Genesis 1:24. We have this word hiya, all right? It's this nepash hiya. So it's saying, essentially it's saying things that breathe and live, nepash hiya, okay? But then, a few words later, we have this hitu aretz. And they're telling us that this hitu is the same word, but it has a variant. However, if you search heat, and there's a way to search these. I might have explained in other videos, but I will explain one more time. This is very important. This is how you're going to start unpeeling this big inorganic onion that the Masoretes have wrapped the text in. What you would do is you would, for instance, right-hand click on the hitu. Okay, even though it's 2416, and just before that, hiya is listed as 2416. That's all right. You right-click on it. You say Search Old Testament. Then when you find it in its form, that you're finding it in the text, not as Hiyeh, but as Heat, H-Y-T, Heat, you're going to select that. It's best to select it from right to left because they have Hebrew oriented from right to left. I orient OBRY from left to right. And there's reasons for that. There's a cult now I completely forgot the word. There's like occult maxims concerning reversing things. This goes back a really long way. And one of the ways that they would curse language or concepts is, of course, turning them around, reversing them, flipping them. That's why when I produce OBRY translations or OBRY in any way, shape, or form, it all reads in orientation from left to right. And it's also easier for anyone coming from a Western language base to read from left to right. And the other thing is, if I was to write a sentence in English from left to right, from right to left, from up to down, from down to up, you could read that. There's no reason why this orientation has to be backwards like this. It actually creates more work for the person trying to understand this language to read it like that, in that backwards orientation. But anyways, so since you have to work in the software they've created, just try to select from right to left. Okay, select just the letters themselves, the HYT of heat, not Hiyeh. They're going to be mixed together. You select that, you hit copy. You go up to the upper left-hand window that has the Strong's coded number in it. You hit paste, hit enter. This is basically going to show you all of the words that have those specific glyphs in that specific order. And you can scroll through and see that you can find it in words like shahet or shahit, oftentimes translated as destroy, blot out. Same thing with the word mahit, to blot, to destroy. You'll find it in the context of those words quite a lot. And even if you stay in the context of, let's say, just the words that they say, you'll find it mostly in H2421 and H2416, translated mostly as life or to live. But what you'll find out is it means more like vitality, energy, okay, naturally. But something else you'll see is that oftentimes they have to use it in certain contexts as really as wild, not just being, living, and doing. And if you check the hot roots, because you can either have or not have that middle Y and still have a very similar word, you'll find that H2844 is oftentimes translated as break or dread. H2846 4 times as take, heap, pile. 2865 and 66 54 times as dismayed, broken, abolish, and then H5181 9 times as come down or broken. But what you get is you get an overall picture of not just being, but instead aggression. And so when you start looking at the words that are in 124, this Be'ema, Ramash, because before that, the Nepashiyah is very much it's an overarching term. You'll find it used to describe just about anything that's living and breathing. Okay? And then it goes into more specific. You have this word be'ema, romash, uhit, aretz. Those main three things. And we'll get a good idea of Ramash. We'll get a good idea of the other things. But you do have a few very broad classifications listed there. The next verse, 25, it reads, U'iosh, so he made, he did, he completed. Aliyim, so it's oftentimes verb, then subject. At hit, aretz, lamine, at bema. That's a big specific category there too. Bema, hit, aretz, bema, lamine. So lamine, to reproduce in its kind, after its kind, is not a terrible way to translate it. At all Ramash. Now, not just all Ramash. Kol Ramash adame lemineu. Uyira alayim ki thub. So he saw it all, he appraised it all, and he established it as good. So in Genesis 1:25, we don't have that broad term, which was the nepashia. What we have is the three more specific categories of living things that he listed after the nepashia. And you can check nepashia, and you will see it applied to all manner of creatures. That's why it's very broad. And what he's talking about specifically is those things that live and dwell on the land. Before that, what he had brought forth was all manner of things that dwell in the sea and the air. This was the day before. All right, so now he has made these three specific categories of life that live and dwell on the land. Now, what I want to specifically point at is the fact that in Genesis 1:25, it does say, while it's saying what he made or completed, not only did he make or complete this hit, eretz, that's one type of thing, u'at, ebema, now that's another type of thing, u'at kol Ramash adame lemineu. All right. So what you'll see in English, as I had just read before that, you're going to see this wording where it says, and every living thing that creepeth upon the earth. Because oftentimes, unfortunately, this word Ramash is translated as creeping thing. Some other translations, including Latin and Greek translations, will actually translate it as lizards. They will give you the idea that it's lizards, reptiles, maybe even insects. When we think of things that creep, we think of, nasties. All right? And almost everybody has kind of agreed that that's what we're looking at when we look at Ramash. And it's very strange that they should do that, because they're not really staying consistent. Because, for one thing, we see that right after the flood of Noah, when Yahweh tells him about what he should now consume, what he should eat. Okay, it's in Genesis 9:3. And I'm doing a lot of stopping and backing up and having to wipe out a lot of stuff that I did because I'm fumbling through, because I'm doing this on the fly. Oftentimes when I do these, they are really just preemptive to me putting an immense amount of time into really studying and writing and organizing all of this into a presentation, okay? So I'm giving you the concepts here. You'll find ramash, that word that is almost consistently translated as creeping things or lizards, things like that. Just this idea of things that are creepy, that slither, that creep across the earth. And, you know, of course, they're oftentimes going to put that in there, that things that creep on the earth, and we'll get to that also. But we see in Genesis 9:3, when it's supposed to be the idea that Yahweh is telling Noah, or Nick, what he is to take and consume. Now, the whole idea of consuming, we're going to look at some point. I don't know if it's going to be now or soon. But anyways, it reads, Genesis 9:3, every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Okay, the moving thing is ramash. Now, it's not everything that moves, because we already saw everything that moves, everything that lives on the land is hiya, nepesh. Okay, it's not ramash. Ramash is more specific. Now, if we look at just the constituent parts of ramash, the glyphs themselves, they would seem to imply something that is essentially like a something that processes ramash. In fact, the glyphs themselves and the meaning that they bear, if you do a word study on mash and the way that R could accentuate that, they look far more like a ruminant animal than anything else. Just the concepts of those glyphs combined together look like a ruminant. Ruminant. The way that ruminants process the food that they take in makes them very good as a meat source for man. So it would follow, that he would be told to take them for his food. And I'm not absolutely sure that whole passage is being translated entirely correctly. However, you will find ramash in a number of other concepts too. And it doesn't follow if they were creeping things or lizards, reptiles, whatsoever. And they are obviously a very different animal, and it is obvious that men are taking and consuming them. And so there would be a complete inconsistency in Noah and his family being told to take them or consume them, and then looking at biblical guidelines for what foods are clean. Reptiles are never, ever considered as clean food to eat. Ever. Okay? So we have one kind of living thing there. And then we have those two other kinds. I mentioned that heat, or hitu, as it would be best to look at it more as predatory or wild animal. And then we'll get to that last one, bema, in a bit. The interesting thing here in this verse is the fact that it is worded in a way that is very strange. And as I just pointed out, the translation is those things that creep across the earth. Well, if that were the case, if it wanted to tell us those things that creep across the earth, it could have told us, for instance, it could have read Kol Ramash Ol et Aretz. Aretz is the land. Okay? To say Kol Ramash Adameh is interesting. Now, what they've done is they've taken this Adameh, it's H127, and they have translated it mostly as earth, ground, land, soil. But we have land, earth, ground. It's aretz. It's very clear. It's in Genesis 1:1. It is consistent. We know that's the land. We have words for dry land, yibasheh. We have harab for very dry land, or land that's been dried out like through drought. But why Adameh? Because what's so strange about that is that first off, in the glyphs themselves, there is nothing about these glyphs that reflect soil, earth, clay, dirt, I don't care. Now, they've come up with all kinds of reasons, but I want to point something out that's very important about this. What is so important about this word and the oddity of it is that it contains, as its root, Adam. Now, what the mainstream story usually is that Adam, let's just say the popular version of Adam, what most people teach, Adam was taken from the Adameh, the soil, right? That's what they tell us. But there's nothing about Adameh that should reflect soil. There's nothing in the glyphs themselves that speak to us, this is ground, this is soil. Nothing of the sort. And I'm going to quickly explain to you why that's the case. When an OBRY or Hebrew word is describing something in a less specific sense, we're going to start with that. It uses this so-called feminine ending of eh. It's like the equivalent of our e, eh. Okay? We can see that in so many listings. If you just go through the list of all the Strong's words that are parsed out in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, you'll see this huge amount. There's so many, it's got to be hundreds of examples where you'll be going through words and you'll be looking at, okay, we have a simple root, whether it's 2-glyph or 3-glyph root. And okay, it means this thing. And then a few entries later, you'll see that same word with the E ending, and you'll see, well, it's got the same definition, or it's got nearly the same definition. What it is every time that E is added on to one of those simple roots, it essentially is the same word, but less specific. It's also used as a feminine suffix if referring to a woman or if referring to a thing that is considered feminine or, let's say, general, not specific. If we were talking about like just the physicality of male and female, look at the idea in mechanical things. You have a male adapter that is protruding. You have a female adapter that is inward. It receives. The male and female aspect are different, and when you add a female aspect on, all you do is you take something that's more specific, more directed, as in the male aspect, and you simply just soften it or generalize it, depending on what kind of concept or what the context is. This happens all the time in the sense of locations. All the time with locations. if you were giving a location, for instance, a place called Gebo, and instead you saw in the text Gebo with that E at the end, it would just be more generalized. Instead of them going directly into Gebo, they've gone to Gebo, so they're very near to Gebo. That's how it works geographically. And as I just said, conceptually, if we're talking about a concept, any word that is reflecting a concept, as soon as you add that E at the end to the concept, you have just taken it from being more specific, more quote-unquote male, to being less specific, softer, and more general, or quote-unquote female. This happens all the time with the word land, aretz. If it's specifically talking about the land itself, it's aretz, or aretz, the land, the aretz. But if it's talking about aretz in general, like going down towards the land, the earth, what is under our feet, it will say aretze. If someone bows their head downward towards the earth or the land, it will say aretze. Towards there, not the earth itself. They didn't put their face on the earth in many cases. Sometimes maybe they do. But mostly it's saying that they would bow their face earthward, aretze. Okay, so it's not necessarily, when I say feminine, it's not necessarily, though it can be used, it's not necessarily feminine. It is simply more generalized. And oftentimes when you generalize something, you're saying we are referring to this thing or concept, but in a very general way. Okay? I hope that makes it very clear. So, let's talk about Adam for a second, because I just said Adameh being translated as soil and earth and land. It doesn't follow, because there's nothing about that word that should make anyone think that it's talking about the earth, other than the fact that we have been trained into thinking that the Bible is saying, for one thing, that Adam, and not all Adam, but Adam in Genesis 2, which we'll get to, was taken from the soil. That's why we think soil. We think that because it is often translated as earth and soil in many of its occurrences. And we'll see how that doesn't necessarily follow either. But just the word Adam, okay? Because in the next passage, we go into this pattern again, where Elohim, or God, says he's going to do something. He purposes, determines, and says this is what's to be done, and then immediately after it's done, or he does it. So in the next verse, Genesis 1:26, it says, Uyamer Elohim Naoshe Adam ben Salmanu. He's saying, all right. So he says, now I'm not going to get too much into the let us and our and the n prefix and the new suffix. But fine, I'll go with the English for now. All right. Let us make Oshe Adam. And now here's the descriptive words. Be Salmanu. So, like a shadow, in our shadow. And then the next word, ka, so as or like, damutnu. Damutnu. All right, the root of damutnu, which is oftentimes translated as likeness, like, similitude, or fashion, which always means this physical likeness. It's going to bear with it the sense of a statue. And I'm going to show you why. So the roots that we have for dam would be H1818, 360 times, and it's translated as blood. Now the next one is H1819, dam, and it's used as an adjective, and it's translated or used as like, liken, compared to, and that's what we're seeing here in this verse. And then we see it again in H1826, used about 30 times as silent, still. And then there's some other forms too. There's 1825, damiyun, like. 1820, deme, cut off, perished, or actually silenced. 1822, deme, one time is destroyed. But again, silenced, even stilled, and it has this idea all the time as a statue, silent, still. When Joshua asks the sun and the moon to stay still, the verb in there is actually dum, as a statue. Now you look at the glyphs, D, the idea of coming to a point, being very precise, which being very precise to a point not only can refer to likeness, as in how much something looks like another thing, like a statue would look like a person, but also in the sense of not moving, staying as it is. If you made something, if you made an ice sculpture and it was demut, but then it melted or moved, it would no longer be demut because it moved. That's why it's also used as still. So the root dem as a concept, and you have to remember, OBRY is a language of concepts. The glyphs are conceptual. They bear a meaning and an idea, but it is conceptual, and if you stop and think about it, that follows because we don't think in sentences. Almost nobody I know thinks to themselves in sentences. We think in concepts. If we think about something we're going to do, we don't think of it as a sentence. We don't say a sentence in our mind. We think of us doing it. If we remember, we think of the sights, the sounds, the feelings, concepts. It is a language of concepts. We think in concepts, so the language is in concepts. We have to look at the glyphs, the way they're put together, and then the way they're contextualized, all in concepts. So when the words are used for Adam in verse 26, ben salamnu, in like our shadow, a shadow of, which a shadow is just, it's a form, and it's not quite even the form. And then demut, likeness, dem. That root is dem, and we have to remember dem, that root, it's likeness. It's likeness. It means precise, still. That's the meaning that it's bearing. Okay? So when we go back to a word like adameh, there is nothing about adameh. And by the way, verse 25 is the first time we see any word bearing this these glyphs in this way, adameh. Okay? So we don't see anything else around it, before it, in context with it, that leads us to believe that it has anything to do with earth or soil. In fact, everything we see about this word adameh should lead us to believe that it has something to do with Adam. Why? Well, because first off, we see that dem is used as likeness or image. In fact, that's why blood is called dam. So if we have children, if we have siblings, if we have those that are closely related to us genetically, they are very much like us. Because genetically they are like us, and we would oftentimes say they are blood. So Adam, for instance, this idea that Adam means to show blood in the face, that's incorrect. It doesn't mean to show blood in the face. Adam is literally the A is a sort of a priori kind of term, and then dam. It's the same thing with ab for father, ah for brother, am for mother. Adam means my likeness. My likeness. Who's my? We know who my is, because it's who wrote the Bible, who inspired the Bible. Adam is a strong likeness. His likeness. I know blood comes from dam. But our genetics is in the blood. They are our blood. They aren't simply our bone or simply our flesh. They are our blood. Blood is precious. It's the likeness. It has the materials. This is why I refuse blood transfusions. Those materials are in the blood. Adam, in context in the Bible, it means a strong likeness. It doesn't mean to show blood in the face. It doesn't mean to show blood. I've known enough of people who are not white or Caucasian that can show blood in their face when they're angry, when they're embarrassed, and they do get embarrassed. They can blush. It just doesn't look the same as if you're a Caucasian. When you're a Caucasian, you do show that rosy complexion far more. Okay, but people who are not specifically Caucasian, but people who are of lighter other races can show that phenomena of the blood in their skin at various times. So that's a straw man. Now, understanding dam, demut, doom, dame, and Adam. Understanding all of those things and then going back to a word like Adameh, and then believing that it somehow has, with no proof, with no references, textual references as far as cognates, to convince us that it means ground or soil is a stretch to believe. So what if in Genesis 1:25 we're looking at these broad kinds or classifications of these land creatures or life forms, and we see that Aliyim completed or made, Osh, all, Romash, Biadameh. Well, the thing is, oftentimes in the scriptures, in OBRY, or in Hebrew, you're going to see that if something is belonging to another thing, it will simply be before it in succession. If the context, as far as the syntax of the verse varies, you can sometimes see it in succession afterwards. And I can give you a few examples real quick. We'll find two of them in the next verse. Well, maybe two verses. Genesis 1:28. It's talking about what the Adam would have dominion over. Okay, and it's listing these different basically every other life form on the eretz, the land, the earth. Uradu means to have dominion over. Be-gedet, in gedet, the fish. Ayam, it just says be-deget, ayam. They're in succession, and it means the fish in the sea. Be-deget, ayam. Or, now the reason it's giving this be as a prefix is because it's talking about what the Adam would be ruling over, or having dominion over. Okay? And then after that, it lists the op, which are all things that fly, the op eshemaim. The shemaim is the heavens. So we see just two examples, 2 verses later. We know how that works. Okay? So, well, it's 3 verses later. I'm sorry, because we're in Genesis 1:25. So when we see kol ramash the edameh, although they have taken edameh and demanded that it was soil, ground, or land, and they would say ramash edameh, that means the things that belong to the soil or the ground. But essentially, most animals do. And we will see in time. I don't know if I'll go over it exhaustively today concerning Ramash, that the idea of the creeping thing, as I just illustrated with Noah, it just doesn't follow. But the whole point here is that this Ramash, this type of animal, which the glyphs themselves, and if you search the roots, you would search Rem, you would search Mash. You look through similar roots to that word, and you can do it in the same way that I illustrated doing it with HYT, heat, in Esword. You'll find that it best fits a ruminant animal. So he makes all Ramash the Adameh. Now, that's not an anachronism, okay? But it is describing that these are all of the sorts of animals that are associated and kept by and near to and used by the Adameh. And that E generalized ending on the end tells you that there is a sort of broad spectrum there to Adam. All Ramash the Adameh. And then after this it says that he appraises it and it's good. Then the next verse, 126, because he hadn't made the Adam, the Adameh in 125, he's simply making all of the Ramash, which is directly associated with the Adameh. Then in 126, and he says, let's make Adam bit salam kadamut. Now what's interesting about the salam and damut words is they specifically reflect something that is very real, visual. I know a lot of people want to say that what's meant here by bet salam and damut is that we're talking about attributes as far as non-physical, maybe mental attributes, emotional attributes, spiritual attributes. These two words they bear the connotation of things that are entirely physical, not non-physical. Okay? And then it goes on to say, Uyuradu, that Adam would have dominion. And here we've got Bidagat Ayem, the fish of the sea, Be'ou B'Shemaim, the things that fly in the heavens, U Be'ema. Now we have this Be'ema, which we're going to get to because we really have to get the full context of what we're seeing as far as origins and who's who and what's what. But then it goes on to say, U B'Kal, and in all the Aretz, the land. Why didn't it say Adameh? I thought Adameh was just as good as land or soil. No, it says Aretz. Aretz is the land. And in all, Eramash. Eramash. When you see something like that, you know for one thing you're looking at a conceptual language, because something's attributes dictates what it is. So if it says all of the ruminants ruminating over, now it says, didn't we just see in the last verse, all Ramash the Adameh? So why wouldn't we see all Ramash over? It says ol, over or against is ol. The Aretz, Aretz, not Adameh. All, let's just insert the ruminants who would ruminate over the earth. So what we have to do if we want to take a further look at this idea, well, actually, before I do that, let me just read the next verse. And it's going to have some aspects to it that are also part of the confusion. And what they've done is they've sown a whole lot of confusion. This is why we cannot rely on these word studies that take one particular word, as in, let's say, an entry in Strong's, and it goes through the occurrences of that entry. Because first off, we know that Strong's will take a word such as, let's just say, as I showed you with he, hy. Hye could very well be different than hyt. In fact, it's likely that it is, because it has different glyphs in it, in one way or another. Now, they'll take a word like that, and they will put hundreds of entries as classified under the umbrella of that word bearing that meaning. The problem is, if you do a word study and you're not looking for the specific glyphs that make up that word, let's say hye, and you find only those occurrences, and you find them in the same context with the same kind of language, and you have to look at every word around them. If you're not doing that, you're not going to get word studies right, because there's far too many words that they have done this with. And there are far too many Strong's entries that bear way, way too many ways that just one word can be used. Now try it sometime. Just open up Blue Letter Bible in your browser and start with H1. And then just scroll through. You can use your arrow keys. You can use your right arrow key to scroll up or down in the numbers. And just hit that right arrow key. And look right down in Blue Letter Bible when you hit the next entry. Just below where you'll see the word, because they'll give the official form of the word at the very top. And then if you look directly down, there will be the KJV translation count, and it'll tell you how many times they say it occurs. And then right below that, the KJV translates Strong's, and then it'll give you the number in the following manner. And then it'll show you all the different ways that word is translated. And you will get a good idea of how many different ways they have translated the same word, sometimes in utterly, absolutely, completely different ways in the same entry. In the same entry. That's why word studies, the way we've been doing them, they're just not going to cut it. Because they're just going to keep breeding continued confusion. So the next thing that we're going to see, which is strange and doesn't follow when we do a search on these words and take a look at their cognates, their roots, and where they come from, is verse 27. And it says, Yibara Elohim at the Adam. So he created the Adam in Salamu, but Salam. Okay, in sort of the form of his shadow, so to speak, of Aliyim bara atu. Then it says Zekar u naqabe bara atam. Them. Now what we'll see virtually across the board is we will see male and female. We'll see zekar, translated as male, and we'll see naqabe, translated as female. When you hear me make a sound like q, that is a q, to distinguish it from k, the k, naqabe. If it was nkb, it would be nakabe. So these words are very interesting when we start looking at them, Zakar and Naqabe. One of the things that's interesting is that throughout the first chapter of Genesis, besides for instance, trees and very specific types of things that actually are reproducing like within themselves, there are some life forms that can do that. In general, we don't see in the description of everything that's being made that it's being made male and female. It just follows, okay, that it's being made to reproduce. And most things reproduce via the male aspect to the female aspect. The female reproduces, carries the offspring, and then delivers the offspring into this world. But for some reason, in 127, we are supposed to know that they're made male and female. We would know if we were reading the Bible, we would very clearly know that man is male and female. But for some reason, we're to believe that it had to specifically tell us that they were made male and female, though the narrative doesn't specifically tell us that about anything else. Now that's interesting, and it's something that we do want to keep in mind as we continue to look at this, okay? And then the verse after that, it says, Ui barak atem, be blessed him, aliyim uyemer, and he said to them, Peru urabu umala'u at the aretz. So fill the land, not fill the Adamah. Why not? Fill the aretz. Uka bashe uradu. And then he's telling them that they're going to have this, they're to rule over, and they will have dominion in the basically the fish of the sea, the flying things in the heaven. I should almost just say the swimming things in the sea and the flying things in the heaven. In all hiya. Now that hiya is all things that are living or quick. Let's see, and the Remeshet Ol, the Aretz again. So now, after that, it's going to get into giving to them all of these things as far as like flora and everything. So what we do see is we see man is Adam. Adam has the root of dam, likeness, still, image, like a picture, in fact. Dam would be very good if it were meaning a picture, a still. A still. That's why that root is used in the context of something being still. Okay? But then we have this Adame, and nothing about it follows earth or soil. So in order to check this out, and it's really interesting how inconsistent Strongs can be, because oftentimes they'll take a word and they'll use it as an entry, and then you select that word for a search in, say, one of your Hebrew modules. And I would suggest one of the easiest, because it's not in the calligraphic block text that you have to look at, and it's smaller, so more fits on your screen, is the Hebrew Old Testament Plus and the Hebrew Old Testament modules. And those can be gotten pretty easily on the in the downloads section of eSword. So this is one of those entries, Strong's H127, Adame, that stays consistent. Every time you see Adame, it's going to be, well, actually, I honestly think it's always Adame, the Adame. I don't think one time it appears without the So here's what's interesting with this or e, which the Jews call the he. When it's at the end of the word, I told you it has that generalizing effect. When you see it at the beginning of the word, it actually has the definite article effect. If you think of it in the sense of when we look at the old glyphs of it, it has this, it looks like something spreading out. So if you put that at the beginning of the word, it has this idea of increasing or specifying the word in front of it. If you put it at the end of the word, it has an action of generalizing it, if you see what I mean. So I'm just actually checking, because I thought I had looked at this before, but okay. So I guess in a couple of places I'm seeing now in the later parts of Genesis, it's not with the definite article E at the front. But what happens is this. If you were going to do a word study on this, if you were going to say, well, I don't know, I guess, Adame is kind of weird, because we have a word for land and soil and all, eretz. We have other words for land and soil, yibash and harab, descriptive words for the land or the soil. What's the deal with this Adame? I mean, gosh, it looks just like Adam, but it's got this generalized, quote-unquote, feminine suffix in it. Well, how do I test it? Looking at all of the entries or occurrences for it to see how it works. And again, if you were to do this, if you were to do a word study on this, and what you did was you just chose to look at all of, let's say you just put H127 in the Blue Letter Bible, which I might actually just do right now, just in case I have to refer to it. What's going to happen is that very quickly, as you start looking through the occurrences of it, you're going to say, oh, well, gosh, I guess it obviously has to be soil or ground. I mean, geez, it just works in these contexts so well. And I know people who do extensive word studies in the sense that they're looking in context in the English, either in the context of English translations, or even, let's say they're looking in the context of Hebrew, but they are going along with the way that the Masoretes have deemed all of these various surrounding words in the verses to be rendered, and they're getting tripped up. So, I mean, if you look at Genesis 2:5, you see, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there's arets, and there was not a man to till the ground. Well, why couldn't it just said there's not a man to till the arets? Because the arets is the ground. You can till that. Why would it be Adame? But we don't think of that. We just think, well, I mean, it works in context. But here's the thing. You can take a word, and because of the way that words kind of work, you can switch the meaning of a word. You can say this word is supposed to be this. And if the observer doesn't know any better, they could read it in context. They could read it in a lot of contexts. And if it's just an object, and if it's an object that is quasi-similar to the target that you've changed around in some way or another, in, let's just say, in form, the way it can be used, just because it's a noun. And remember, these translators, they don't stay consistent. All right? Even with Adame, them trying to say that it's land, they'll say it's land 125 times. They'll say it's earth 53 times. They'll say it's ground 43 times. They'll say it's country 1 time. They'll say it's husbandman 2 times. They'll say it's husbandry 1 time. Guys, husbandry and land are not the same thing. So they're switching things around. Okay, if you had the word hat, and you convince somebody that hat, in fact, was necktie, shoes, and you put that in a context, and let's say you got 2 verses that were a little bit difficult, but it's okay, because you can slightly vary the words surrounding it and make it seem like it works. And to the casual observer, it seems like it works. It seems like in Genesis 2:6, Adame for ground works just fine, right? Because, I mean, the earth and the ground, I guess they could be the same, right? Because you look them up in a thesaurus and you might find ground as a synonym for earth. Genesis 2:6, there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. That makes sense, right? It does in context. Say, you can understand that, can't you? I can. And the Lord God formed man, this is Genesis 2:7, of the dust of the ground. Well, that makes sense. See, that's where Adam comes from. He was formed from the dust of the ground. Adame. That makes sense. Because I see it in context. So I can start forming ideas, opinions, worldviews from these things. And once I have formed those things, I can start acting on my beliefs. But are your beliefs founded on the facts? Are they founded on what we can best extract from the pure text? Or are your beliefs and thus actions, because actions are based on beliefs, we act based on what we believe? Or are your actions and beliefs based on faulty renderings, malicious renderings of the text? See Genesis 2:9, it says, out of the Adame, ground, made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. See, it works just fine. Out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field. See, it works just fine. He made all of these things from out of the ground. It tells us in Genesis 2:7. It didn't tell us that he formed the Adam out of the ground in Genesis 1. It didn't tell us that he formed every beast of the field, fowl of the air from the ground in Genesis chapter 1. In fact, in Genesis chapter 1, it says that he actually formed all of the fowls from the sea. He said, let the sea bring forth all of the fish and all of the fowls of the air. But, I mean, it works in context when I look at it in Genesis 2:19. Genesis 3:17, cursed is the ground for thy sake, he tells the Adam. Now it's interesting because we're going to look more at the Adam of Genesis 2. But anyways, if you go through it just in all of the examples that you can get of the English renderings based on the Masoretic dictations, you'll probably see mostly passages that seem to make sense. Why not? However, if you begin to look at that word Adame in its native surroundings, so in its native context and without the dictates of Masoretic. And what you have to do, you have to look at the surrounding words. And oftentimes what's going to happen is you will have words that are very specific to the way that this gets rendered, which are altered. You have to pay close attention to those things while you test this word Adame, which again has no evidence whatsoever in its form, A-D-M-E, that it has anything to do with ground or soil. All of the evidence in the word itself tells us that it has far more to do with Adam, A-D-M, which means the strong likeness of whom? The Creator. So all of the evidence in the word itself tells us that it doesn't seem like it should bear any meaning of ground or soil or land or clay or anything like that. It looks like it is Adam, but sort of general, you know? Like if Adam was man or a type of what we consider man. Let's just call Adam a kind, okay? Because Adam is a kind. If Adam's a kind, well, when we look at Adame, it just follows, since we understand how that suffix E works, that we're looking at a number of variants of Adam expressed in Adame. So we're not being specific. We're being a bit more broad. The Adame. That's what it looks like just in the glyphs. That's what the word, if I track all of the cognates, and I'm very studious and I pay close attention, that's what all of the cognates would tell me. That it's related to Adam. Not ground and soil, but Adam. Now, as many of you know, and I've said this many times in the past, there's a lot of deceptions out there. The world is full of them. In fact, I often refer to Revelation. It's chapter 16, and I believe it's the 5th vial that's poured out. And the man looking and seeing these things, he identifies himself as John. I don't know which John that is. But he says that these spirits, or really, and this is how you know that Revelation was also likely written in OBRY, is because it should be the breath, these breaths or wind comes out of these factions, right? And in the translation, we see that it's the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And he says that they were like frogs. And I know that a lot of people out there have had a heyday with that. But if we are going to interpret Revelation entirely by the Bible, the only place that we can find frogs, if indeed that is the correct word, and maybe whether it's frogs or not, it was likely the same word as what was used in Exodus. And that's why it was translated as frogs. There is some sort of animal or thing that is inflicted upon Mitzrayim. And this particular thing that is inflicted upon them is inflicted so badly that they literally have these things, whatever they are. Let's say they're frogs, okay, for just whatever. For argument's sake. They were saturated in everything. They were in their flower pots. They were in their beds. They were in their houses. This particular thing that Mitzrayim was inflicted with as one of the plagues was so pervasive, it was in everything. There were so many of them that when Yahweh finally killed them, all of these things, whatever they were, maybe they were frogs, maybe, they had to gather them all up, and they had to carry them from their homes and from their yards and gardens and get them away from them and put them into these huge heaps. And they stank terribly because there were tons and tons and tons of dead organic matter, and they reeked. The whole land probably stank of them. And this is the way of describing these lies. That's how pervasive the lies are in our world today, coming from the dragon and the beast and the false prophet, so they are translated, coming from these major ruling world factions. The lies are so saturating of everything we do, we think. All of our beliefs, remember, belief dictates action, are perverted by these lies. And so, one of those lies, and you'll hear it all the time because whether they mean to or not, white nationalists, CIs, things like that, they use, for instance, the term white, the term black, brown, red, yellow, to refer to these large swaths of people. And maybe these people all have a similarity to them, in the sense that, for instance, when you talk about, white people, they have a certain similarity, across the board, or black people, maybe there's a certain similarity to a lot of them if they haven't had admixture. However, we know for a fact, if we look at all of the people that might qualify in whatever the qualifications or categorizations are of Negro or Caucasian, all kinds of variants. There are many variants. There are many variants within the deceptive terminology that we use today. Okay? So-called white people, and I don't know any white people, even albinos aren't white. But anyways, so-called white people. There are many variants in those people. There are many variants in so-called black people. And when I say variants, I mean specifically tribal variants. There are different types within these huge, deceptive, overarching terms. So when we see a term that is a generalization, what we can safely assume and then need to test is that that overarching generalization may actually be referring to a number of variants within a more specific kind. Okay, if Adam is the specific kind, then Adame would likely be variants within. Now, there's far more that has to be looked at. There's far more words, terms, and problems in the text that we have to look at. We do have to look at the occurrences of this word Adame, Strong's H127. We do have to look at the contexts. We do have to look at Zekar and Nekwabe to see if they actually mean male and female, as in the genders. And we have to look at other terms that we find in Genesis 1, not only Ramash and what it most likely is, but also Beme or Be'eme. Because we're not going to properly understand our origins, who is who, what is what, how we were created, how we should be, remain, what should be our actions. We're not going to understand any of these things if we don't understand origins or what the Bible is specifically telling us about the origins of the creation, the kinds, the living things in this creation, and their place and proper function. So I'm going to pick these things up immediately in the next episode, which I will be recording as soon as possible. So until the next one, take care.